And Keats is probably the hardest of our romantic poets to read. He is more elusive in terms of Allusive, that he makes these allusions to classical mythology and all that. Um, and sometimes we'll have the other poet that has like maybe the whole poem is an allusion, like Destruction at Sennacherib. But with Keats, I mean, they're just all throughout some of them, right? And again, that love of the senses. We're going to talk about that in one of the poems more specifically. I think, like Shelley, one of his major themes is beauty, right? And again, beauty is, I think, with the second gen poets, beauty is a more common theme. Nature is also throughout that, but beauty, as we talked about with Shelley, it's like, how do we define beauty? And when we look at, I think, Ode on a Grecian Urn, I'm going to give you some quotes from another letter that kind of give you his perspective. So let's look at this sonnet. This is a Shakespearean sonnet, as opposed to the other sonnets that we've seen before, which have been that Italian or Petrarchan sonnet. And that means that instead of doing the octave and then the sestet, we have three sets of four lines, so quatrains, followed by a couplet, right? And you're going to see that the punctuation usually really kind of reinforces that quatrain. So it's still iambic pentameter. It's still going to have a fairly regular rhyme, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and then the couplet, G, G, right? That's your standard Shakespearean sonnet pattern. So in this one, remember, in the Petrarchan or the Italian sonnet, the octave is what presents us with a problem or an issue or a conundrum of some part. And then the sestet is some kind of answer or contrast, right? In the Shakespearean sonnet, we're going to have three quatrains that might ask questions. They might present different states of mind or different aspects of a problem. And the couplet is going to be kind of like this epigram at the end that gives us a statement by the narrator about what he thinks about something or what this is meant to him, something like that, right? So when we think about Keats and his early death, and we see a poem like this, When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be, it just kind of makes it even more poignant. His epitaph on his tombstone is, "Here lies one whose name was writ on water." And again, it's like, what a great line, right? So if we look at this, we see, when I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high piloted books and charactery hold like rich garners the full ripened grain. So remember, one of those things that he feared was that he would die before he could get everything written. And I think this reflects that. Now notice on line 3, the word piled has that little accent mark over the E. That means that you're supposed to say piled. Sometimes when you see a word, usually that ends in ed, it might not have that accent, but if it fills out the meter, then we say, the ed, even if in normal speak we would say it silently, right? So here he goes. When I'm scared, that I'm not going to live, right? Before I can write all of these things, right? He says, when I behold upon the night's starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and think that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, nor never have relish in the fairy power of unrelenting love, right? Then on the shore, and then this is that enjambed line. So this isn't a perfect, like it ends, like a perfect Shakespearean sonnet would have every single quatrain ends in a complete thought, right? And then you'd have the couplet. This one doesn't, right? So if we look at what these are saying, he's showing 3 fears that he has of what he won't be able to do if he dies. So I won't be able to finish writing what I want, right? I'll never be able to, be inspired by nature to write these great things. I'll never be able to love you, Fanny, the way I want to. He says, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone, and think to love and fame to nothingness do sink, right? So he says, I look at myself and I put myself in the perspective of the whole world, and all of these fears about being famous, being able to write all this stuff, and what I'm going to leave, it just kind of dissipates. I think when we see Ode to a Nightingale and Ode to a Grecian Urn, we're going to see echoes of this very same concept. Losing myself in nature to help me overcome the anxiety and fears that I face about what I might lose, right? So in terms of figurative language, we have a simile, and usually, I mean, I'm not saying that these are the only aspects of these kind of figurative languages when I do this. I'm just pointing out one so that you guys can then look for others, right? So here, the simile, there's one in here, you know, again, like Rich Garner's before his pen, right, is before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high pilot books in character hold like Rich Garner's the full ripened grade, right? So you think about, you know, I can collect all of this ripened grain, right? So there's our simile. Apostrophe, this is speaking to something that is not there, right? It's from a distance. So lines 9 through 10, when he's talking to fair creature of an hour, this is probably Fanny. We have a metaphor, line 11 through 12. Never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love. So love is fairy power. There's a kind of a metaphor there. And then we have personification in line 5, the knight's starred face, right? So again, those are just, again, remember, romantic poetry isn't super jammed packed with figurative language. It's pretty straightforward. And so those are some of the more common things you can find there. And then the theme here is, of course, mortality, passing of time. And then I didn't write it here, but one of the themes also is how nature can help us lose ourselves, how it can give us peace and solace and take us away from the earthly cares, right? Okay, so La Belle Dame Sans Merci, which is the beautiful woman without mercy. If you type this in, you're going to find in Google, you're going to find, and again, Keats is not the only one who wrote about this, and you're going to see lots of pictures inspired by this. This is one of my, I love both of these. This one is by Frank Dixie. This one is by Waterhouse. This is just a very famous kind of image to recreate, the femme fatale. So we see here this beautiful maiden on the horse who has bedazzled the knight. And in this one, you can see how she has wrapped her hair around him and is kind of pulling him down. And you can see she doesn't have shoes on. She's a very wild child with her hair all down, right? So again, you can see multiple versions of this. One of the other things you can do is you can hear Tom Hiddleston reading La Belle Dame Sans Merci. I highly recommend it. I don't know if you could hear it if I played it, but if you want the link, email me and I'll read it to you. It's just an amazing performance. And I will also say Benedict Cumberbatch's Ode to a Nightingale is also just, of course, Ode to a Nightingale is one of my favorite poems, and I might just feel a little bit prejudiced about that one. So this is a ballad, right? A ballad is one of those traditional English forms that we see romance going back and looking at. This was written in 1819, that year of, all those wonderful things. It is written in alternating lines of iambic tetrameter and iambic dimeter. I'm sorry, not alternating, but 3 lines of tetrameter followed by 1 line of dimeter. And then sometimes it's trimeter at the end. So he has a little variation. It is iambic throughout, right? And then we see A, B, C, B, A, D, E, D, F, G, H, G, I, J, K, L, M, So he has some rhyme, but it's not regular. It's a bit odd. So we have symbolism, like in line 9, I see a lily on thy brow. So the lily, the fading rose on his cheeks, there no birds sing. These are all symbols of death, right? Absence of life, right? I think I read another analysis that said the lily on the brow was somehow a symbol of his knighthood. I don't know. I've never read that before. Lily is usually associated with, funerals with death, right? So that's some example of symbolism. We have consonants. So consonants is the repetition of consonant sounds. So in line 26 with the N's, and honey, wild, and manna, dew. So that's that example of the consonants. We have time. The time here is winter, and so that usually equals death, or it's ending of autumn going into winter, right? And then we have assonance. That's that repetition of vowel sounds. So line 6, so haggard and so woe be gone, right? So that so woe, so woe, right there. That's an example of assonance. And again, assonance, consonants, alliteration. These are all techniques that poets use to add a sensory kind of element that, and again, I told you, I think with Shelley, to read these poems out loud because you need to get them in your mouth. You need to hear them because sometimes you don't really feel or hear some of these beautiful uses of figurative language and meter until you speak them out loud, right? So in terms of, we're looking at, we have both a medieval flair, which again was popular with the Romantics. So this is the knight and the fair lady. And it's kind of like the knight going into some kind of perilous deed. But then there's a supernatural element that she's a fairy child, right? So we see both of these aspects here, right? In the themes, illusion versus reality, death and love, the femme fatale, seduction. A common belief in fairy lore is that if you eat at a fairy's table, if you take food or drink and eat from them, you cannot leave them. You become their slave, right? Nature is untamed and dangerous, right? Unlike some of his other poems, we're going to see nature as a solace. Here, the fairy's child is wild. And so it's not that nature is bad. It's just that it's untamed and dangerous. You can't civilize it, right? I'm not sure if I put in, okay. So let's look at this, right? So here we have someone, a stranger is speaking, a stranger is riding along in the woods, and he comes across near this lake, and we know it's winter because it says the sedge has withered from the lake, so that and no birds sing, right? It says the squirrel's granary is full, the harvest is done. So this is past autumn. We're going into winter, and this knight is just kind of loitering around this, kind of desolate place. So the stranger is saying, "Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. So why are you waiting here? What is ailing you that you are just standing here, right?" And then he repeats it, "Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woe begone? The squirrel's granary is full and the harvest's done. I see a lily on thy brow with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too." So this is like, I'm seeing that you are dying here, right? Death is coming, right? And so then the knight replies, "I met a lady in the mead," so like the meadow, right? "Full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan." So there's an indication that they had sex, right? "I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sidelong would she bend and sing a fairy song." So she's singing to him. So this music, right, is seductive. So then she feeds him, and they're all foods from nature, right, that she would find, right? "She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild, and manna dew, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true." So is her language strange because it's like a spell, right? She's using her fairy language to entrance him, right? "She took me to her elfin grot." That's a kind of like a grotto, a cave, right? "And there she wept and sighed full sore. And there I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses for." So she's crying, right? So is she sad that she knows that her love is going to kill him, right? And we get the repetition that her eyes give this wildness, right? "And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, oh, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamt on the cold hillside. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La belle dame sans merci, thee hath in thrall. So these visions in his dream that he's getting are warning him. So a thrall is a slave. She has enthralled him, right? These are the other men that she's seduced. And so he says, I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaping wide, and I woke and found me here on the cold hillside. So he wakes up and she's gone. And he's still here and he can't leave, right? And he says, and this is why I sojourn here alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake and no birds sing. So there's that repetition of those last two lines, or the last three lines that are in the very first stanza. We come back circular, right? So he's answering the stranger's story, right? Isn't that just an awesome poem? I don't find it depressing. I grew up reading Arthurian stories and fairy tales and things like that. So to me, it's just one of those, when I was a child, I just loved sad love stories, right? Where the knight dies, and it just reminds me of that kind of thing, right? So there is a cautionary tale here about seductive wild women, and this chivalric knight who does, this deed, and yet he is enslaved by her and is left, right?